Hey, welcome back. I'm glad you stuck with this whole series. If you haven't, I do encourage you to go back and watch the whole course of the Resilient Method. But as we've worked through this, it's been quite the journey. And today is an important one because this is where it all ties together. This is where it carries you into the next steps in your life. And that's just trusting the process. So as we dig into this, I encourage you to listen and just lean in and utilize these concepts and principles that we're talking about so that you can have that growth continually. And so to start off, let me ask you something. When was the last time you stopped long enough to notice how far you've actually come? Not how much further you have to go, not the goals that you haven't reached, just how far you've already come. My guess is you don't do that very often. Most of us don't. We're usually focused on the next problem to solve, the next responsibility to carry, the next thing that needs our attention. And by the time we accomplish one thing, we're already thinking about the next. It's almost like we've trained ourselves to overlook our own progress. And after a while, something interesting starts to happen. We begin believing that because we aren't where we want to be, we must not be getting anywhere at all. I've had conversations with a lot of individuals over the years, good people, hardworking individuals, those who love their families and they genuinely want to become better spouses, parents, and leaders, and even followers of Christ. And you know what surprises me? It's rarely a lack of effort that discourages them. It's uncertainty. They'll look at me in the eye and say something like, Chris, I'm doing the work. I'm trying. I'm making better choices than I used to. But honestly, I can't tell if anything is really changing. Maybe you've never said those exact words, but maybe you've thought those. I know I have. Because there's something incredibly discouraging about putting your heart into becoming a better person while feeling like life isn't changing fast enough to notice. And when that feeling hangs around long enough, it starts whispering lies. Maybe this isn't working. Maybe this is just who I am. Maybe I'm always going to struggle with this. Maybe everybody else figures it out except me. See, those thoughts that don't usually show up all at once, they're quieter than that. They sneak in after another ordinary day. After another week that felt pretty much the same as the last one. After another month where you were faithful, but nothing spectacular happened. That's when discouragement gets dangerous. Not because it makes you quit overnight, but because it slowly convinces you that continuing isn't worth it. This is one thing I've learned about quitting. It usually doesn't happen in one big decision. It happens in 100 tiny ones. You stop reading, you stop praying with the same expectation, you stop having the hard conversations, you settle for good enough, and you tell yourself that you'll get serious again next month. The next month becomes next year, and before you know it, you've drifted a long way from the person that you were trying to become. That's why I wanted to save this conversation for the end. Because everything we've talked about throughout this series eventually brings you here. Not to another habit, not to another strategy, but to a decision. Will you keep becoming the person that you're called to be? Even when you can't yet see everything changing around you. I think that's one of the hardest questions that we'll ever answer because all of us want confirmation that our efforts matter. We want proof. We want to know the early mornings meant something. That choosing patience instead of anger made a difference. That saying no to old habits isn't just an endless battle. We want to believe today's choices are building tomorrow's life. The problem is, life rarely gives us immediate confirmation. Instead, it invites us to trust something that we can't fully see yet, and that's uncomfortable. At least it is for me. See, I'm wired to solve problems. I like seeing progress. I like checking the boxes and knowing that something moved forward today. But the older I've gotten, the more I've realized that most meaningful things in my life refuse to operate on my timeline. My marriage didn't become stronger because of one great conversation. It became stronger because of hundreds of ordinary ones. My faith, it wasn't built on a single breakthrough. It was shaped in quiet mornings when nobody else was watching. Even the way I coach today wasn't formed by one defining moment. It came from years of listening, learning, making mistakes, asking better questions, and really allowing God to keep working on the parts of me that I didn't even know needed work. None of that felt dramatic while it was happening. Most of it felt, well, ordinary. And maybe that's what we've misunderstood about growth. Maybe we've been waiting for transformation to feel dramatic, when most of the time it really just feels surprisingly ordinary. One of the questions I ask clients from time to time catches them off guard, because I'll ask, what if nothing changed over the next 6 months except you? Most people answer too quickly. They immediately start thinking about circumstances, their finances, their marriage, their career, their health. But that's where I stop them. I say, no, that's not what I'm asked. What if the circumstances looked almost exactly the same, but you didn't? What if 6 months from now, you're still working at the same place, but you become more patient, more grounded, less reactive, more intentional with your family, more confident in who God created you to be? Would that still be progress? And I think most of us would say yes. But here's the interesting part. That's usually not how we measure our lives. No, we measure promotions, we measure income, we measure milestones. We measure things that can be seen. Very few people measure the person that they're becoming. And yet, that's the one thing that you'll carry into every area of your life. You don't leave your character at home when you go to work. You don't leave your integrity in the driveway when you head to church. Wherever you go, well, there you are. That's why I care so much about who you're becoming, more about who you're becoming than what you're accomplishing. Ultimately, your accomplishments will come and go. But the person you become, that's who stays with you. I think that's one of the reasons we become discouraged. We're grading ourselves with the wrong scorecard. We ask, did I get everything I wanted? But maybe a better question is, did I become more like the person I said I wanted to be? And as you can see, those are very different conversations. One's going to depend on circumstances, and the other depends on choice. But here's the good news. You don't control every circumstance. You control today's choices. There's something incredibly freeing about that, because it means that your growth isn't held hostage by what everyone else decides to do. You can still become a person of integrity even if someone else lets you down. You can still become a patient parent even if your day falls apart. And you can still become a faithful spouse even when life feels overwhelming. No one can make those decisions for you, and no one can take them from you either once you've made them. This is what I've noticed. I've met some strong people who don't think they are strong at all. In fact, if you ask them how they got through some of the hardest seasons of their lives, most of them wouldn't have some dramatic answer. They'd probably just shrug their shoulders and say something like, I just kept putting one foot in front of the other. But I love that answer. Not because it's impressive, but because it's honest. We have this idea that extraordinary lives are built through these extraordinary moments. Sometimes they are, but most of the time they're built through ordinary moments that someone refused to waste. A spouse choosing to apologize instead of defend themselves, or a parent putting their phone down long enough to really listen to their child. Someone getting up a little earlier because they know their soul needs some quiet before the demands of the day. None of those moments make headlines, but stack enough of them together, and eventually they shape a completely different life. And not because any single moment changed everything, it's because every small moment was pointing in the same direction. That's something we don't talk about enough. Direction matters more than speed. I know individuals who are moving fast, but they're moving toward burnout. And I know individuals who are making a lot of money, but they're losing their families. I know people who look successful on the outside, but they're exhausted, trying to keep everyone convinced that they've got it all together. Movement isn't the goal. The right direction is. And sometimes the healthiest thing that you can do is just slow down long enough to ask, is the one that I'm becoming someone that I actually want my kids to become? That's a sobering question. It's also an incredibly clarifying one, because at the end of the day, people are going to remember far more about the way that we lived than the goals that we achieved. And can I tell you where I think we get stuck? We assume the process exists to get us somewhere. See, I've started believing the process exists to prepare us for somewhere. Did you catch that? The process doesn't exist to get us somewhere, it exists to prepare us for somewhere. If all you're focused on is arriving, every delay will feel frustrating. But if you believe the season is preparing you, even the difficult days begin to have purpose. That doesn't necessarily mean that you'll always enjoy them. I don't enjoy every challenge that comes my way, But it simply means I stop asking, how fast can I get through this? And really, I start asking, God, what are you trying to grow in me while I'm here? That question has transformed my life because instead of fighting every difficult season, I've learned to become a student in it. Not because I enjoy pain, but because I don't want to waste it. You remember that oak tree that we talked about in the previous video? I've thought about it quite a bit over the years, not because I'm fascinated with trees, but because I think there's something they understand that we often forget. An oak tree doesn't spend its energy trying to look grown. It simply just keeps growing. It's not comparing itself to the tree down the hill. It isn't worried that another tree is taller. It doesn't wake up every morning wondering whether anyone has noticed another inch of growth. It just does what it's created to do. And eventually the roots become a trunk. Then that trunk becomes branches. Then the branches become shade. And then the shade becomes something other people benefit from. Isn't that interesting? The tree never grows for itself. Its growth eventually becomes a gift to everyone around it. And that rings true for us too. Maybe becoming a better spouse isn't only for you. Maybe your significant other experiences the fruit of that growth. Maybe your kids do too. Maybe becoming a person with integrity doesn't just change your life. Maybe it changes the people who trust you. Maybe becoming emotionally healthy gives your family permission to become emotionally healthy. That's something we don't think about very often. We tend to think personal growth is, well, personal. But I've never seen it stay that way. See, growth has a way of spilling over. It just like discouragement does too. And bitterness and anger, whatever fills us eventually reaches the people closest to us. That's why this matters so much. Not because you're chasing perfection, none of us are going to get that right. This is about becoming the kind of person whose presence leaves people better than it found them. That's worth giving your life to. So let me ask you something a little personal here. Who benefits if you don't quit? I don't mean who congratulates you. I mean who quietly experiences the difference because you kept doing the work. Maybe it's your spouse. Maybe it's your kids, if you have some. Even just the people you interact with daily. Maybe your colleagues watch the way you handle disappointment and learn strength without you ever giving a speech about it. Maybe years from now, your grandkids experience the fruit of the decisions that you're making today. You may never connect all the dots, but that doesn't mean that they're not connected. Sometimes we think that we're growing roots for ourselves when we're actually growing shade that we'll never personally sit under. That thought has stayed with me because it reminds me that faithfulness is almost never just about today, and definitely never about just me. One of the biggest turning points in my own life came when I stopped asking myself, when is this going to finally pay off? I started asking this different question instead. What if it's already paying off? Just not in the way I expected. At first, I didn't even know how to answer that. Like a lot of people, I was looking for visible evidence. I wanted something I could point to and say, see, it's working. But life doesn't always work that way. Sometimes the most meaningful changes don't announce themselves. They quietly become part of who we are. Like you don't wake up one morning and think, well, today I'm going to become a more gracious person. No, you simply notice weeks or months later that something which used to throw you off no longer has that same grip on you. And you respond differently. You recover faster. You extend a little more grace than you used to. Those moments are easy to overlook because they don't come with applause. But if you do pay attention, they're telling you something very important. They're reminding you that growth isn't always loud. Actually, sometimes it's almost silent. And I wonder how many answers we're waiting for when what we really need is just a little perspective. Think about someone you deeply respect, not because they're famous or because they're successful, but because of the way they carry themselves. Maybe you've noticed something about people like that. They don't seem to panic every time life gets hard. They don't need to prove that they're the smartest person in the room. Or they're comfortable saying, I don't know. They're willing to apologize, that they listen well. There's a steadiness about them that is hard to explain. And I can tell you, I've never met someone like that who became that person overnight. No, their life shaped them. The disappointment that happened shaped them. Success shaped them. Failure even shaped them. The victories taught them some things, but guaranteed the setbacks taught them even more. And when you admire someone's character, you're usually looking at the years of quiet formation, not one defining moment. And maybe that's why we're so tempted to quit so soon. We're comparing our unfinished story to someone else's finished chapter. We see their fruit, but we don't see their roots. It brings me back to the oak tree. The part people admire isn't the part that made it possible. Nobody walks up to the oak tree and says, look at those incredible roots. Yet, if the roots aren't healthy, nothing above the ground survives very long. And people are a lot like that. The strongest parts of your life are usually built where no one else is looking. It's the private decisions. It's the conversations you have with yourself. It's the promises you keep when breaking them would be easier. It's the quiet choice to keep showing up when no one is keeping score. That's where your roots grow. Not out where everyone else can see them, but down deep where strength was formed long before it's ever revealed. Here's another question I've been thinking about too lately. What if this season isn't asking you to produce more? What if it's asking you to deepen your roots? See, producing more is about looking successful, but deepening is about becoming unshakable. And if I'm honest, I think we've spent too much of our lives chasing the first one. Not because we're shallow, because it's what the world rewards. But the people I admire most aren't impressive because they avoided the storms. They're impressive because the storms didn't uproot them. Maybe that's what this season is doing in your life. Not keeping you from becoming who you're meant to be, but rather preparing you to become someone who won't be easily moved when life gets difficult. That is resilience at its finest. And if that's true, then maybe this season isn't an interruption. Just maybe it's the foundation. Let's switch gears a bit. Most of us don't mind hard work. We'll get up early, we'll stay late, we'll put in the effort. And what wears us down isn't usually the work. It's wondering if the work matters. If you've ever trained for something, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The workout itself isn't always the hardest part. It's looking in the mirror after weeks of consistency and thinking, I don't look any different. It's easy to let one moment like that erase dozens of good decisions. Not because those decisions stopped mattering, but because you couldn't see what they were building. Life has a way of doing that. It asks you to trust what today's choices are producing long before tomorrow arrives. And that's uncomfortable. At least it is for me. I like clarity. I like knowing that if I put in the effort, I'll see the result. But life doesn't always give us that guarantee, does it? Instead, it asks us something much more difficult. Will you keep becoming the kind of person you said you wanted to be, even if nobody notices for a while? I think that's one of the real tests of character. Not what you do when people are watching, but what you continue doing when they're not. A mentor once told me something that I'll never forget. He said, the person you're becoming is always more important than the problem that you're trying to solve. At first, I didn't fully understand what he meant, but now I do. See, problems will always come and go. You'll solve one, then another one will show up. Life has a way of keeping us humble like that. But who you become while solving those problems, that stays with you, such as the patience that you learn, the humility you develop, the courage you discover. Those things become a part of you. No one can take them away. That's why I don't believe difficult seasons automatically make us stronger. We've all seen people walk through hardship and come out bitter. We've also seen people walk through hardship with a deeper sense of compassion, wisdom, and grace. And the difference wasn't the hardship. It was what they allowed the hardship to produce. That realization changed the way I look at my own struggles. Now, when life gets difficult, I still ask God to help me through it. But I'm also now saying, don't let me miss what this season is trying to teach me. That right there shifted my attention from escaping the moment to learning from it. And I found that when I stopped fighting every difficult season, I started noticing things that I would have missed before. Let me share something that's become really important to me too. Growth never happens by accident. It's always awareness that creates growth. See, two people can walk through the exact same experience, with one becoming cynical while the other's becoming wiser. See, the experience wasn't the deciding factor. It was the response to it. That's why we spent this entire series talking about intentionality, because life is constantly asking us a question. How are you going to respond? Sometimes that question is asked through success. Sometimes it's asked through disappointment. Sometimes it's just inside an ordinary day and feels almost unforgettable. Those ordinary days matter more than we realize, because that's where our habits settle in. That's where our values are tested. That's where we quietly become the person that we're going to be. And I wonder if that's why we miss so much of what God is doing. We're waiting for him to work in this extraordinary way while he's faithfully shaping us through the ordinary. Because not every lesson comes through a mountaintop moment. Sometimes it comes while washing dishes or driving to work or taking a walk. Even sitting in silence after a conversation that didn't go the way you hoped. All those moments right there, they don't look important until years later. And then you realize those were the moments that slowly changed the direction of my life. If I could sit across from the table from you right now, I don't think I'd spend much time asking you about your goals. I'd probably ask different questions. I'd ask something like, what kind of person do you hope your family experiences in 5 years from now? What do you hope your closest friends say about your character? Or when life gets difficult, what kind of presence do you want to bring into the room? Because those questions reveal something deeper than achievement. They reveal who you're becoming and they show you your why. And when you know who you're becoming and you see your why, you stop chasing every opportunity. You stop measuring yourself against everyone else. You stop feeling like you have to prove your worth and you begin making decisions from this identity instead of for your identity. That may be one of the biggest shifts a person can ever make. You know, when we first started this series, we weren't talking about habits. We weren't talking about productivity. We weren't even talking about resilience. We were talking about the kind of person you want to become. Everything else was simply just a way of getting there. As we walk through each part of this journey together, I hope you've noticed something, that none of these ideas stand on their own. If you haven't gone through the core series, I would suggest going back and working through it and starting at the very first video, recognizing reality. But here's an overview of that progression and how it lays out. So, recognizing reality doesn't accomplish much if you never engage intentionally. Engaging intentionally eventually wears you out if you never strengthen what's happening inside of you. And strength without healthy boundaries, well, that leaks away over time. And then healthy habits become harder to maintain if the people around you are constantly pulling you in the wrong direction. And nurturing yourself every day only matters if you're willing to stay with it when the process feels slow. See, every part supports the next, just like every root supports the tree. That's why this has always been more than just a framework. It's a way of living, not perfectly, but intentionally. And I wonder what would happen if you stopped looking for that one breakthrough that changed everything and started trusting the quiet work of becoming. That's where most transformation happens. It's not an all one big life-changing decision, but it's in hundreds of ordinary decisions that all point in the same direction, like I said earlier. The decision to pause before you react, the decision to forgive when holding on to that resentment feels easier, the decision to admit that you are wrong, the decision to ask for help instead of pretending you're fine, the decision to keep your word, the decision to spend a few quiet moments with God before the world starts demanding your attention. None of those moments seem very impressive by themselves, but over time, they become your life and transformation really takes place. I think that's what people misunderstand about character. See, character isn't built during big moments. Rather, the big moments reveal what you've been building all along. And you can see that when the pressure comes, when the diagnosis comes, when the relationship gets strained, when life doesn't unfold the way that you've hoped. You don't suddenly become someone new, you reveal who you've been becoming. And that's why today matters. Not because today has to be extraordinary. Not because today is shaping tomorrow. That's why. Before we finish, I want to ask you for one favor. Go back and watch the series if you haven't. And when you do, don't let it become just another playlist that you watched. I want you to choose one thing, just one. Maybe it's finally having a conversation that you've been avoiding, getting serious about your health, asking for forgiveness, setting healthy boundaries, or maybe it's getting up 15 minutes early so your day begins with purpose instead of panic. I don't know what your next step is, but I do know this. You already know what it is. Most of us don't struggle because we don't know the next right thing. We struggle because the next right thing usually requires courage. So don't worry about taking 10 steps a day. Just take one. And then tomorrow, you take the next one. That's how you grow and change. And then a few years from now, I hope you won't remember any point from this series. Honestly, you probably won't. You may forget by tomorrow. But I do hope that you'll remember a different way of thinking. I hope when life gets difficult, you won't immediately ask, why is this happening to me? But instead, I hope you'll pause long enough to ask, what kind of person is this season inviting me to become? Because that question will change everything. It shifts your attention from what you're losing to what you're building. It shifts this frustration to formation, from surviving to growing. And maybe one day you'll find yourself sitting across the table from someone who's discouraged, someone who's convinced that they're not making any progress, someone who's thinking about giving up. And when that day comes, I hope you don't just encourage them. I hope you recognize them, because you'll remember what it felt like to wonder if the work was worth it. You'll remember the quiet seasons and the waiting. Then you'll smile because you'll know something they can't quite see yet. You'll know that some of the most important work God does in a person's life happens long before anyone else notices. You'll know that roots grow in silence. You'll know that faithfulness often feels ordinary while you're living it. And you'll be able to look them in the eye and say, don't quit. Not because life is about to get easy, not because you'll have all the answers, but because becoming the person God created you to be is always worth the journey. Before we say goodbye for this series, I want to leave you with one last thought. Years from now, people probably won't remember how busy you were. They won't remember how many emails you answered, how many meetings that you attended, or how many things that you crossed off your to-do list. But they will remember how you made them feel. They'll remember whether you were present, whether you listened, whether your words brought peace or pressure, whether your life reflected the values that you claimed were important. And in the end, that's the legacy that we're really building. Not a life that impresses people, but a life that influences them, quietly and faithfully, one choice at a time. So wherever you are today, whether you're just beginning or you've been walking this road for years, keep showing up. Keep choosing what matters. Keep becoming the person that you were created to be. You won't always see the growth while it's happening, and that's okay. Roots don't need the applause. They simply just keep growing. And because they keep growing, one day, someone else finds shade beneath branches they never knew were being formed. That's what your life is becoming. Not just stronger, but a place where someone else can finally catch their breath. So thank you for walking through the Resilient Method with me. This isn't the end of your journey. If anything, it's the beginning of living it. So keep growing, keep trusting, and when the progress feels slow, remember this. The process isn't just building a better future for you, it's building a better you for the future. Subscribe, hit the bell, and I'll see you around in other videos.